to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lana, if you would be so kind as to call the roll.
Oh, she's at the podium. Oh, I have to be here.
Here, you can have my seat.
Commissioner Klaus?
Here.
Crawford?
Here.
Johnson?
Here.
Kropa? Here. Lathrop?
Yep.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Max Bauer?
Here.
And for the Road Commission, Commissioner Merrick?
Here.
McKellar?
Here.
Nelson?
Here.
Brown?
Here.
And Mouser's excused.
All right. Next on the agenda is our first opportunity for public comment. Lana, if you would, please.
Any person shall be permitted to address a meeting of the Board of Commissioners, which is required to be open to the public under the provision of the Michigan Open Meetings Act. Public comment shall be carried out in accordance with the following board rules and procedures. Any person wishing to address the board shall state his or her name and address. No person shall be allowed to speak more than once on the same matter, excluding time needed to answer commissioners' questions, if any. The chairperson shall control the amount of time each person shall be allowed to speak, which shall not exceed 3 minutes. The chairperson may, at his or her discretion, extend the amount of time any person is allowed to speak. Public comment will be solicited during the 2 public comment periods noted in Rule 5.4 Order of Business. However, public comment will generally be received at any time during the meeting regarding a specific topic currently under discussion by the board. Members of the public wishing to comment should raise their hand or pass a note to the clerk in order to be recognized and shall not address the board until called upon by the chairperson.
All right. At this time, I will open it up for public comment. Would anyone like to make public comment? Please come forward to the podium. Come on.
Visual aids. Some of you will recognize that. Don't start my time, I'm not there yet. My name is Norbert Tutlis. I live at 4565 Buckhorn Drive, Traverse City, Michigan. I've been a tax-paying citizen of Grand Traverse County since 1976. My reason for being here will be obvious to some of you that remember me and not so to others. I propose something which I think is the right thing to do, and I will try and elaborate on that. All political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their equal benefit, security, and protection. Now, most of you recognize that as Article 1, Section 1 of the Michigan Constitution. All I ever wanted to happen when the future of the dams was changed to the fate of the dams was to have a public vote on removal or preservation of the dams, a public asset which should be decided by the public. All I ever hoped for was the restoration of a public utility using renewable energy, producing clean electricity for around 400 families who wanted green energy. All the polls taken showed the people wanted to save the dams and restore them to green electricity production. All Grafton, Wisconsin people wanted was to save the Bridge Street Dam and the Milwaukee River, and when allowed to vote in a binding referendum, they voted to save the dam and spend the tax dollars if necessary to accomplish that goal, which was to save their dam. So in spite of the Wisconsin DNR, Department of Natural Resources, saying it would cost $4 million to restore it, but they would pay the $1 million to remove it, the people decided to trust themselves and voted to save it, and saving it cost them $1 million, which they thought was a good investment, at least according to Bill Harbeck, who was one of the founders. All of us made a big mistake when we let the Michigan DNR finance, steer, and control our study of removal of our dams. I believe flawed numbers, flawed facts, flawed statements, much like Hartman Hammond in the original study, and the financing they provided allowed them to steer and to influence the conclusion of that whole process. We let them buy our decision when the people would have never let it happen, in my opinion, if it would have come up for a vote. They wanted removal at all costs and got it at quite a bargain. All of us made a mistake in trusting Traverse City Light and Power with our dams. They didn't maintain the dams, powerhouses, or equipment to even the lowest standards, and when they turned them back to us, they were a mess. They abandoned the licenses, and so all of that would be bad enough if they hadn't hoodwinked us and used the money raised for dam removal to remove their dam, leaving us in the lurch part of the reason we're here today, I guess. So all I'm asking is for you elected officials, representatives of we the people, to finally do the right thing, in my opinion. Put the disposition of the dams to a vote, and of the people who elected you and trust you and want to hear what we have to say. Please, we deserve this consideration to be heard. Thank you.
Anyone else? Last call. All right, seeing no one, we will move on to our meeting. The first thing I would like to do is express my appreciation to the Road Commission for attending tonight. Next on our agenda, the Boardman Dams Implementation Team will make a presentation both to the County Board and to the Road Commission regarding the current status of the project.
Okay, I'm going to take over from here and introduce a couple of members of the team. Actually, I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and I would like also our project partners to join in. There are members of the implementation team here, and why don't we start with our consultant.
Dan Devon with AECom, consultant on the design of Phase 2.
Frank Couturier, I work for the Grand Traverse Band of Hollywood Chippewa Indians. I'm the chairman of the implementation team.
I'm Kim Balke. I'm with the Conservation Resource Alliance. I'm a project manager. I'm also an ex officio member of the IC.
I'm going to stop everybody right now. In order for people to hear on that are watching this on television, I need to ask you to speak into the microphone, please.
Oh,
Want me to redo that then?
I'm sorry, but
No, that's okay. I'm Kim Balke. I'm a project manager with the Conservation Resource Alliance. We're a project manager for the Boardman Dams project, and we're also an ex officio member of the implementation team.
why don't we have our presenters stand up? Carl, you want to come forward and introduce yourself?
Hey, good evening. I'm Carl Platts. I'm a project manager with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
And probably didn't hear him on camera, but that's Dan Devon.
Dan Devon with AECom, design engineer for Phase 2.
Frank Couturier, Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, and implementation team chairman.
Okay, and if
Thanks for having us tonight.
you'd hit a couple slides for me, Frank?
Sure.
Because you're going to be up next, right after me. We're going to talk briefly about the history of the dams, and we're going to talk a little bit about the conceptual design that we've been working on for the Cass Road Bridge. We're going to look at the engineer's estimates of the costs. We're going to talk about the timeline. We're going to talk about some milestones that are coming up and for decision-making and for securing funding. We're going to talk about our fundraising status, and we're going to talk about the potential involvement of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to finish it up. Right now, we are involved in Phase 2 of this project. The Phase 1, of course, was the removal of the Brown Bridge Dam, which occurred at the end of 2012. Pretty much everything is now settled from that as far as legal actions that occurred as a result of the breach of that dam. That was just an error in engineering, it appears to be. But going forward, we're looking at a completely different way of removing this dam, and they'll explain that a little bit later. If you go to the next slide. Here's the brief overview of where we are. The idea is to return the Boardman River to its natural state eventually. It's probably the best way to do it because that's where the river wants to be, and that's where it was 100 years to a millennium before that. It's going to be one of the largest wetlands restorations in the Great Lakes Basin. It's going to be also one of the largest dam removal projects in Michigan's history. I think it is the largest one. And we are under consent agreement to make sure that that happens. That, I think, was distributed in a packet to the Board of Commissioners. I don't think the Road Commission's seen it, but we are, in fact, the DEQ has given us a letter that says to pull that dam out, the Boardman Dam out, by December 2012. So we're a little over our timeline, but we're working on it. And Frank Couturier, our chairperson of the implementation team, is going to take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having us tonight. Dave touched on the project, a little bit on the project history, and if you step back a little bit, the project got to this point starting with meetings, public meetings, 2005 through 2009. Virtually hundreds of meetings involving thousands of folks to come up with various choices. There were, I believe, 84 original options of removal, whittled down to, or refined down to several, and a final decision for the guidance of the continuation of the project to be the removal of the uppermost dams, the Brown Bridge, Boardman, and Sabin dams, and the modification of Union Street Dam. Dave touched on some of these the general points of where the project is right now. So we talked about the dams, returned the Boardman to a more natural cold water, free-flowing river. The dam removal project was enabled through the various amounts of funding components that came together for this. This is a total team effort. As many as 42 pieces of funding. I think we're somewhere between 13 and 15 mechanisms. Ken will talk about that a little bit later, that are actively involved in this, and a lot of them are repeat funders for this project. There's a lot of folks that have believed in it since its inception and continue to believe. So the project timeline, that's 2005 to 2009, with those preliminary decisions, all those meetings, all the input from literally thousands of people that were involved in those meetings. 2007 was the consent agreement or consent order to remove Boardman, Sabin dams. From 2009 to 2012, the fundraising and the planning and the design and engineering component was moved to an elevated level. The team continued to raise funds. Remember, part of this plan was a really large-scale plan. But by the time you get to the end of this project, it's most likely going to be in the $18 to $20 million ballpark. $4.3 million of it have already been raised by your local partners, the folks that are working for you that are sitting here in this room, that raised these funds to remove the Brown Bridge portion of this, of the entire project. And that continues to be the goal of the project partners, everyone involved trying to seek out those funds to adequately take care of pieces of the project as we move forward. 2012 through 13 was Brown Bridge Dam removal and restoration, which is ongoing. Brown Bridge isn't getting left in the rearview mirror. There are continual efforts. Grant funds brought out to the Brown Bridge area for riparian vegetation, planting, habitat. There continues to be efforts. I think there are some grants queued up through the NRCS, through some of the grants that Steve has written, and Father Fred through the NRCS to GTB. Another $250,000 worth of funds that will be spent out there this year on restoration efforts. 2016 through 18 would be when we're moving into phase 2, and that's what we're talking about here. Phase 2 being the removal of Boardman and Sabin dams. And the folks involved in this project see it as an ongoing restoration project through 2019. After the dams are removed, the continued restoration of that corridor. The team, I won't read all the members, but it's pretty nice to sit back and look at the folks that are on this team. We're talking about several government entities here, and the ex officio members, respected folks in making decisions for this community. This project is for this community. We cherish the resources in the land that we live in. It's the reason why we live here and why people come here. This is the lifeblood of our community. I was talking with Nate this was several weeks ago. We gave a presentation at the Kiwanis Club, and we sat down and did a quick little math and realized that we had 193 million gallons of water that come down through Traverse City and empty that into that bay every day. 30% of the water that's in Grand Traverse Bay comes through this water system. It's the important lifeblood, and the restoration of this project and the goals of the folks that are involved in it are all in it for the right reasons. The dam removal piece, the actual funding that's available for restoration projects through, we'll talk about those in a little bit. There aren't a whole lot of grants out there that allow you to fund building dams, but there are, because of the realization of the issues that dams have on the ecology, there are quite a bit of funds available for the restoration of rivers and the communities they affect. Environmental benefits for Phase 2 is restoring up 3.4 miles of Coldwater River system, the reconnection of this 160 miles includes all the tributaries and all basically the feeder streams that come into it. Restore more than 50 acres of wetlands and associated riparian upland habitat. I'm sure that's a note. See if I can get rid of that. Touch screen.
Oh.
Is there river? Yeah, there's river
I'm glad I wasn't going nuts.
done.
It's dark up here.
There are the river sound effects.
And of course, the enhanced recreation opportunities that come along with a free-flowing river running right through the middle of our beautiful city. Community benefits. The economic benefits that we just kind of talked about, a healthy river, a healthy system, a healthy community, and a wonderful free-flowing waterway that comes right down through the middle of it. And the reason that we're here in the first place is because the owners, you folks were basically left with the responsibility of aging infrastructure that was passed on because of the liability that they represented. The funds raised through the restoration efforts go to help this community alleviate these long-term maintenance and safety issues. The removal of these dams is an important way to keep our community safe. Promotion of tourism and business growth. We've heard all kinds of ideas on how this might affect our community and our city and the county. The promotion of tourism and business growth, the businesses that may be developed along the lines of this reborn river, and folks that will come to see it. And also the community benefits support the long-term goals of the Grand Vision Plan. I already talked about the community-based dam disposition assessment 2005 through 8. The Boardman River feasibility study was funded as a result of that process, and we already talked about the amount of folks and the amount of people and the amount of meetings that were done in several areas of this community. At the Civic Center, most of those meetings took place at Tuesday nights in the Civic Center, if you'll remember. The BRDC's statement of purpose to engage all interest in assessing the recommendations of the fate of the dams and upon thorough analysis of the options, and that was completed and in an open and transparent manner. I think there's a lot of folks that were involved in this project. Yeah, and that leads right to the many participants and the collaboration. This project was given, was voted by the Fisheries Habitat Society, I'm getting their name wrong, as being one of the 10 waters to watch in the nation, and 10 waterway projects in the entire nation. And we were asked to come up with names of the folks that were part of that effort. And when we got to over 100 names, we can continue to realize how many people have been involved in this project at a level that have actually helped the project succeed. It is definitely a community effort. You see local, state, tribal, profit, non-private, and federal participation on all levels, and continued efforts over the years and through fundraising efforts, continued focused direction towards the fruition of the project, continued funding, and we hope that continues at a level that will keep us moving forward. Global interest, we've certainly seen this project noted around the country. We've had folks from all over the United States actually contact the team and ask what the mechanisms were, or inquire what the mechanisms are that make a plan like this successful, or a project like this successful. Over 2,000 question answers, public survey that were 18,000 distributed. The local support, so we have all these major funders, and we talked about the local support. You have the Grand Traverse Band, the county, city, Rotary Charities, Camps and Services, Olson Foundation, Traverse City Light and Power. These are all folks that have been involved in this from the get-go, all continuing their support. Major funders that are not quite from this area. We have the Great Lakes Fishery Trust, we have the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. All of these 6 that are listed here are repeat funders. They continue to fund the project because they think it's a good idea. They believe in the value of the restoration for the community. This is just, Dan, I think this is probably somewhere about where you're taking over. There was another slide before you, so I'll hand this to Dan at this point. Thanks very much.
Alrighty. I'm going to try and speed through the technical aspects of this, so if I start going along too quickly, feel free to stop me or ask a question. When talking about a river restoration project, one of the key components is to get a context of where you're coming from. What are the impacts that have been realized on the river, and what are we mitigating? So as you can see here, this is a list of activities on the river that have occurred essentially since settlement in the area. Starting in the 1800s, we started seeing significant logging operations within the watershed. Mills were being put up. The river was being used for logging. Some key dates to take note of: Union Street Dam was constructed in 1867. The original Boardman Dam was constructed in 1894. Sabin in 1906. Keystone in 1909. And Brown Bridge in 1922. So a lot of activities during this time. Additionally, there were several dam failures during this time. One of the more substantial ones being the failure in 1961 that took out Keystone Dam. Again, looking at the impacts that we saw on the river. This is during the heavy logging operation years. Substantial amount of impacts to the river, sending thousands of logs down almost daily. Essentially where Union Street Dam is located, one of the mills, blocking the river in order to capture the logs, again impacting sediment, wildlife, all different functions of the river. This is construction of the original Union Street Dam. One of the things to take note of is the landscape. There's barely a tree left standing. Obviously substantial impacts to the watershed, lots of sediment erosion during this time period. It also gives us an indication why we have so much sediment within the river, behind the dams. That's part of this restoration process, is we've got to do something with those sediments. This is looking at Sabin Dam, from the dam looking downstream. Again, here we're confining at the dam the river to a small sluice. And again, this is years after the logging is actually kind of past its peak and more or less receded. There's very, very slow restoration in the watershed. This is actually upstream of Sabin, looking down at the original Sabin Dam after it failed. You can see that the structure appears to have collapsed a little bit. This is our familiar Boardman Dam, shortly after construction in the early 30s. And this is what we're looking to get back to. A couple of things to note. One, that's a lot of fish. I'd love to catch that much in a given day. The other thing to note, too, is this is 1923. This is well after we've already started impacting the river. So the river is resilient, and it speaks well to our ability to help restore the river back to this scenario. It has the ability to recover, and it has the ability to produce tremendous wildlife. So that brings us to the first phase of the project of restoring the river. We've, in 2012, removed Brown Bridge Dam and restored 2.8 miles of the river through its former impoundment. Additionally, there was 24 acres of wetlands and over 70 acres of upland habitat that were restored. One of the main key points to take away from this, since construction has ceased, is the key indicators are pointing towards upward trends in the recovery of the system. Our macroinvertebrates, basically our bugs, are increasing throughout the entire restored area, downstream and upstream. And fish counts in species, varieties, are improving through this area as well. So this brings us to our current phase of the work, phase 2, where we're looking at Boardman and Sabin Dam. As your consultants, our primary project components are field investigation, hydrologic, hydraulic, and geomorphic studies, the Cass Road Bridge design, dam removal and breaching operations, river restoration, and permitting. So I'm going to talk about each one of these items relatively briefly, but cover a lot. So field investigations, we've picked up topographic and bathymetric surveys for both of the impoundments, Boardman and Sabin, as well as the surrounding areas, so the dams, the road, and upland areas. We've collected geotechnical borings on Boardman Dam and Cass Road. This data is used to characterize the material that's there for structural purposes for the bridge, as well as for stability purposes as we're evaluating breaching operations at Boardman Dam. Extensive amount of sediment data was collected within the impoundments to both characterize and quantify the amount of sediment that we have within the impoundments. We are continually collecting flow data on the river. This helps us with refining our hydrologic analyses of the river in this stretch and allows us to better refine our design of the restored reach of the river. And then ultimately, additionally picked up wetland delineations, which is obviously a major component of the restoration, but also a major component of the permitting process. The hydrologic impact assessment of the Boardman River dams. One of the big questions that always comes out is removing the dams going to have any impact on flooding? We went through a rather extensive study of developing unsteady routing models of each of the existing dams to assess their flood attenuation capabilities. And we looked at various scenarios at each one of the dams. In addition to that, we also looked at historical and current gauge data on the river to evaluate potential flooded, or to compare it against discharges with regional curves to determine if there was a potential or any indicators that flood attenuation was occurring. And then one other thing that I actually didn't add to the slide, but we also were able to take a look at some of the dam operation data and evaluate that in conjunction with a FERC or the dam hydropower licensing agency. They had done a study similar to this, evaluating flood attenuation. That data essentially all led us to one single conclusion, that ultimately there's no evidence that any of the Boardman dams provided the capacity to attenuate flows during flood conditions. There simply was not the storage capacity. There was also a lack of legal room to be able to attempt to mitigate flows. The other major study that is ongoing still is sediment transport analysis on the restored river. So the primary area of emphasis for this study is looking between Sabin Dam and South Airport, or actually Boardman Lake. So the questions are, once we remove these dams, one of the functions that we're trying to restore is sediment transport. Well, what are the impacts of restoring sediment transport? So several geomorphic investigations were done in that reach to determine both long-term and short-term impacts. One of the main findings we found on the short-term impacts is that partly because of the sediment management activities that we'll be performing as part of the restoration project, as well as just based on the physical characteristics of the river, there's a minimal level of concern for short-term related impacts to properties and infrastructure in the immediate years following the dam removal or during construction. Now, with that being said, it also should be noted that while there's not going to be any impacts from the sediment, there's not going to be any concerns of increasing flooding, the waters will be murky during the restoration effort. So while they're out there constructing or deconstructing the dams and working in the rivers, there will be some sediment, very, very fine material that will make the river cloudy and not as crystal clear as we're used to. But that is a short-term impact. The other major findings that we came up with through sediment transport modeling was one, based on our preliminary findings, we're finding that there's a very low probability of what we'll call near future, or approximately 30 years, of impacts to private property and infrastructure due to increased sediment loads in this area. Beyond that, we have limitations in our ability to predict that due to data constraints. If there's changes in infrastructure, for instance, if South Airport Road is modified, so you start running into a lot of other variables that play into that. Significant delta advancement, that's the other concern, is the Boardman Lake going to fill up. Essentially, our findings would be that any significant advancement of the delta would be measured on the order of centuries. So not something that's going to be a noticeable change. So that moves us from the studies to the design component. The first major design component for this project is Cass Road Bridge. The initial phase on this was to develop a type, size, and location study. This is a standard process in an MDOT project for a bridge, where we take a look at just what it sounds like, the type, the size, and the specific location of it. And as part of this, we included a public input or stakeholder component at several meetings with the IT, which are open meetings, and we had sent out specific invitations to stakeholders in the community to come in and comment on this and provide us essentially the guidelines or the design criteria for the project. So what came out of this is ultimately we wanted a bridge that had two 12-foot vehicular lanes with 8-foot shoulders, and the span the bridge had to span the entire river channel and preferably the entire restored floodplain width. We needed to accommodate a future Boardman River trail, and we needed to obviously meet all of the current bridge design standards from local, state, and federal guidelines. The status of this project is the final design documents have been submitted to the County Road Commissioner and are currently under review. So this project is essentially near its final completion on the design aspect. To give context of what this bridge is going to look like after it's constructed, we have 252 feet for a total span. Clear span underneath is 134 feet, and it's roughly 26 feet from the river up to the bottom of the bridge. So relatively wide open, not going to feel like a tunnel when you're crossing underneath. So what everybody's really interested in, the cost. Our current engineer's estimate, we have at $2 million, or basically $2.8 million. The grant accommodates up to almost $3.1 million. So we essentially are, for estimating purposes, moving forward, we would recommend also including a contingency of $258,000, which would put you at that $3.08 million price tag. Of that, MDOT covers 95% of the project cost, or of the construction cost. So that would be $2.8 to $2.9 million. The local match is 5%. There's actually also some additional items within the construction cost, the contractor staking. So their actual survey costs are not considered participating from MDOT. So that's about $55,000 that gets taken out from the 95% and tacked on to the 5%. So the local match would be $208,000. Currently, we have a construction engineering estimate of $275,000. So a total local cost would be $482,000.
Can you just rewind on the contingency part there?
Yes.
Where does that fall? I understand what a contingency is, but if it's
That's part of
used.
that's part of the $3 million. So essentially, it's the difference between the $3 million and the
I see that.
2.8. So it's our estimate right now is $2.8 million. What we're basically recommending is, for planning purposes, assume it's going to be the $3,080,000.
That's the 5% amount that you're using is based on the 3.08?
Yes, it is.
So if the contingency isn't used, if you do come in at the 2.8, the local match would be less.
Yes.
When were these estimates
That was
done?
my next question.
How old are they?
These estimates are very new. Boy, Jim, I'm trying to remember when we, it was 2 weeks? Yeah, so 2 weeks ago we had submitted to the Road Commission the final documents. Right, Frank brought up a good point. These are based off of engineer's estimate. These estimates, and all of the estimates that we're providing tonight, are based off of, obviously, measured quantities from our designs, but also based off of estimated unit prices. For the MDOT project, MDOT actually fairly well regulates the prices that we provide, assuming that it's a standard pay item. However, caution always needs to be heeded when we're talking about estimates and unit prices, because they're highly variable based on the economic scenario at the time of bidding. I guess the one benefit that we do have is the opportunity to bid this project out well in advance of when it will actually need to be constructed. And we'll be going over the milestones a little bit later in the presentation. But we essentially have the opportunity to, we could have at least 6 months lead time on construction with the bidding process, and as many as 9 months, I believe, of lead time on the construction process. So you're providing a good amount of time where contractors are going to be bidding on a project and they're not going to have a significant backlog likely. That's where you typically see significant increases in costs, is if the contractors have substantial backlogs, their prices are going to go up.
Commissioner Merrick?
No, there's been some money raised for this that's been paid towards the engineering fees. I've heard $300,000, one number was thrown around. Is that included in this? Is that part of the match, or is that something completely separate, an additional cost to the bridge?
That is not included in this, and that'll actually be discussed under the funding component, which we'll be getting to after the technical aspect. But that is a separate cost from this.
Just a breakdown on the 5% calculation there for the local match.
Yes, so what that is...
Trying to do the math, but I'm not adding it up.
You're right. So, like I said, there's like a $55,000 component that is not...
The staking.
it's not a part of the 5% calculation. So if you were to take the $3,080,000 and take off $55,000, take 5% of that, and then add $55,000, it should come in right around that.
See, my teacher said I'd never use this. Okay, so we've got, if we were doing a 5% match straight out on a total construction cost of 3.08, we're looking at $154,000.
Yeah, then you add the staking in.
Then you add the staking in, so I'm adding 55,000.
A little over 200, right?
Right.
55,000, I have to apologize, 55,000 is kind of off the top of my head. It's right around 55,000.
So that's what that is. That's a 5% match on a total construction cost plus the staking.
Correct.
Okay.
So dam removal and breaching, the next major component of the project. The dam removal and the river restoration component, we went through a conceptual design phase for the project initially, and we evaluated alternatives for breaching both at Boardman and Sabin, and then based on evaluating cost and safety concerns, we came up with preferred alternatives. These were presented then during the conceptual design and then furthered here, as you can see, with the 30% design. These are actually 30% design plans. These were submitted about a week and a half ago. Some things, I guess, some key things of note. One is one of the key mantras in our design process for Boardman Dam for the removal is redundant safety measures. We came up with several alternatives for design, and we ultimately selected on one that, number one, we felt was the safest approach. This approach was to utilize a bypass flow scenario for a primary drawdown mechanism, and then provide an auxiliary overflow spillway in the event that the bypass system fails or we get a flow so large that it exceeds the capacity of that system. So through the refinement process going to 30% design, we initially started off with well, that doesn't work on a screen, sorry. We initially started off with a bypass pumping system. However, there's obviously concerns over the potential for mechanical failures with the pumping system, and two, there's exorbitant costs associated with fuel. You've got to keep those pumps fed. So what we ultimately ended up going with on the far left side is a siphon system instead. So this is a gravity system. You initially prime the system, and then it simply, through gravity and suction, it passes the flow on its own. The auxiliary spillway, which is just to the east of that, and I apologize if I didn't, to give a census of orientation here, what we're looking at is the Boardman earthen embankment, Boardman Dam, and then Cass Road on the top right here you can see is the Cass Road over the existing powerhouse. So the auxiliary spillway just to the east, we would be excavating a channel through the earthen embankment but above the impoundment water level, and then lining that with an armored system, articulated blocks, and that would be capable of passing a 10-year flood event entirely on its own should the other system fail or we get a significant storm. Moving into 30%, we've also started working on construction staging areas, construction access, and again, refining the construction sequence. Again, to talk about the safety, because that is really paramount when we're talking about dam removal and modifications. We developed a breaching risk assessment for this project. And what we did is we brought in local partners, our design team, and our national experts. And we sat down and we basically picked apart our design. We tried to come up with any risk or potential failure mode associated with it. And then from that, we talked about different mitigation measures that could be utilized to try and alleviate any risk that would be associated with the project. So in addition to the dam removal and breaching, we've also obviously been working on the river restoration component of it. Again, started off initially in a conceptual design phase and have now moved on to a 30% design phase. The key components of the river restoration were to identify a historic channel. Again, as Frank had mentioned, the river historically was in a relatively stable condition. It's a glacially formed river valley. The river itself in the modern era, the last 10,000 years, hasn't had or doesn't have the energy to really migrate within the valley that much. So because of that, the ideal condition would be to get it back to where it was. Additionally, we've been evaluating the floodplain requirements, which is a hydrologic and hydraulic assessment process. We've been defining habitat measures that could be utilized within the restoration efforts, evaluating the sediment management needs, both active and passive, but then also beginning to work on the detailed design of that sediment management, where the material is coming from, where the material is going, when can we access it in the drawdown process, things of that nature. And then assessing the near and long-term evolution of the river. This is from the conceptual design. This gives you an idea of, one, the historic path of the river. As you can see in the plan view, north is to the right. So the left side, we're starting in the upper impoundment by Lone Pine, with the south downstream of, to the right being downstream of Sabin. As you can see on the bottom, we have a profile of the river that's corresponding to that alignment. Substantial amount of sediment has been deposited in the upper impoundment of Boardman. This would tend to make sense because it's where it's first coming in, it's where it's first going to drop out. But because of the drawdown that we've had occur in 2007, there's also been a fair amount of sediment that's also migrated down into the impoundment. So we're going to have sediment that we're going to be able to deal with immediately off the bat in the upper impoundment, but as we dewater, we're going to be continuing to work through these sediments. As part of the river restoration, as I mentioned, we're looking at the habitat measures, so in-stream habitats such as riffles, which ideally we will simply be daylighting the riffles that are already there. That material hasn't gone anywhere. We'll be adding in-stream habitat in the forms of large woody debris, which also can provide some bank stabilization as well. And then one of the other major components is the general geometry of the channel, making sure that we're getting the proper bank fold dimensions and floodplain dimensions. And again, here looking at a 30% drawing for the river restoration component, we're addressing construction access issues. We're refining where the river and floodplains are going to be located, where those sediments are going to end up being stored, and also wetland impacts associated with it. The sequence of construction for the project, we are planning on Cass Road, obviously the proposed bridge being constructed first. That needs to occur just so that we have a downstream river channel to breach to. The current plan is to begin that in the spring of 2016. Following the construction of Cass Road, or potentially even concurrently with that construction, we would begin floodplain and channel excavation up in the upper impoundment of Boardman. Once we reach that point, like I said, where we can no longer access the sediment without dewatering, then we would begin the drawdown operation at Boardman Dam. Following that, we would be working intermittently within the impoundment, constructing sediment traps and actively moving sediment as we dewater. During this time, we would also be demolishing the existing bridge and the powerhouse and intake works and beginning to reconstruct Cass Road through that corridor. And then finally, we would be finishing out the project with final grading on the floodplain benches and in-stream habitat, bank stabilization measures, and then seeding and plantings. Sabin Dam, obviously, well not obviously, but we would be starting after Boardman is completed. Again, this is also part of the redundant safety measure. We want to do Sabin after Boardman. It's downstream. It's kind of the final catch. So after Boardman's completed, we'll begin the dewatering operations at Sabin. At Sabin, we have a little bit easier scenario. We don't have nearly as much height of water that we're dealing with, so the risk is a lot lower. Additionally, we have a nice concrete structure that we're working with. It's relatively easy to demolish a concrete structure in place and allow water to pass through. Again, just like with Boardman, as we're dewatering, we'll be managing those sediments within the impoundment. Any areas that we can access right away, we'll be beginning to manage that sediment right up front. Otherwise, as we dewater, we'll be capturing the sediment and moving it out of the river. And then finally, again, becomes the in-stream habitat stabilization and seeding and plantings. Cost estimate, and I apologize that this is so small. It was a bigger screen that I was looking at earlier. I'm sorry.
John, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a quick question.
Oh, yes.
With Sabin, will you be using the siphon system as well?
No. So, and the reason being, like I said, we're dealing with a much smaller amount of head, so the risk is substantially less. And additionally, because we're going through a concrete structure, the potential for failure through that is much less. It's particularly out east, there are a lot of dam removals through concrete structures, and the general practice for these lower head dams is to go and just simply demolish it in place and allow the water to flow over. The structure itself is usually ample to handle the stresses of passing the water.
And maybe you commented on it already, but could you...
John, would you speak into your microphone?
Yeah, maybe you commented on it already, but could you comment on the savings on the Boardman Dam of using the siphon system versus the pumping system? Monetarily?
Monetarily,
or is there?
If everything went perfectly well under the sediment management operation with pumping, we're saving $600,000. If it's not ideal and it takes several months, you'd be in the millions. So the cost estimate, and part of the reason why we have as much information on here as we do is to give you a sense of where we're at in the process and the level of detail that we have gone through for developing these estimates. But the key items to take note of are the dam breaching overall is estimated at just over $2 million. The existing dam demolition and cast road construction at the dam is about $1 million, and then the sediment management component and in-stream river restoration is at $1.9 million. So we have a total construction cost right now of just over $5 million. Then we tack on construction engineering cost, estimated administration cost, and then a 20% contingency because we're at 30%. And we come up with an estimate right now of $7.1 million for the removal of Boardman Dam and the restoration of the river through that impoundment. There are also some additional items that are not currently included within this estimate, and that is some of the additional in-stream habitat that could be installed. This is work that is currently ongoing at Brown Bridge and is being addressed by the Conservation District and several other funding parties. We currently estimate that those alternate items for Boardman to be at about $440,000. The Sabin Dam cost estimate, again, much smaller dam, much less risk, a fair amount less sediment. We're looking at about $700,000 for the actual breaching operation and demolition of the powerhouse, and about $750,000 for the sediment management and river restoration. So that brings us to about $1.5 million for the total construction. Again, adding construction engineering, administration, and contingency brings us up to just over $2 million for Sabin Dam.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
The powerhouse removal was included in the Boardman Dam. I just couldn't
Correct.
see the details, but that one was in there as well, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, that was the $1 million. That's the middle portion of it, which I apologize, you can't read right now. Permitting, the final component that I'm going to talk about. As part of this project, we have concerns over floodplains, wetlands, the safety of the dewatering process, and the sediments within the impoundment in terms of their characterization and how we're managing them during the process. These are all items that various agencies have concerns over and want to know how we're going to be doing this. These agencies are represented locally, at the state, and federally. As part of the dam removal and river restoration project, an environmental assessment was developed by the Army Corps as part of the feasibility process, or the feasibility study. This was strictly for dam removal and river restoration. As far as Cass Road, the proposed bridge, the DEQ permit and the DNR Natural Rivers permit have been acquired for Cass Road already, and that is part of the final documents that are being presented to the county, or to the Road Commission. MDOT has stated that the bridge project has been categorically excluded from needing an environmental assessment. This is because there's not a change in land use associated with this project. It's an existing road, it's staying a road. And then now I'm going to hand it over to Kim Balke from CRA, who's going to talk about funding.
Yes, Sonny?
Certainly.
Just a quick question. Early on in this program, I don't know, 2007, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, one of the extensive discussions we had was the possibility of breaching these dams without the removal of the powerhouse. It was saving a significant amount of money, but, at that time, the group kind of came to the consensus it was a better idea to remove it. Can we touch on that just a little bit? If it comes down to dollars and cents and everybody wants to talk about it, here's a fast, easy way to save a significant amount of money is by not removing the powerhouse.
That's a great talking point, actually. And we did look into that. We looked into an alternative to avoid removing the powerhouse. Essentially, two components to that discussion. One is the geotechnical aspect of it, or structural aspect of it. We evaluated the stability of the structure and its ability to handle additional fill that would be necessary for reconstructing a traditional roadway and roadway embankment up against that structure. And essentially, we found that the structure really can't handle the additional load. And so there would likely need to be substantial modifications to the structure in order to make it sturdy enough to handle those loads. So we looked into putting a curve in the road and routing around the powerhouse. And essentially the issue we would run into there are impacts to several large power lines and needing additional right-of-way from consumers in order to make that happen. The cost for relocating, it was 4 utility poles that needed to be relocated associated with that, and the cost for that was pushing it up towards $500,000 or more, and then you tack on the right-of-way with it.
Yeah, and I think, that was part of that early discussion. It made no sense to try to retain the powerhouse at Boardman because of the earthen dam situation. It made maybe a little bit more sense at Sabin because of the fact that it was a masonry structure.
Right, and at Sabin, I guess I will speak to that a little bit. There is a possibility of that still at Sabin. Essentially, Sabin, where we're at in the design process right now, is at the conceptual design still. It was decided that we wanted to push forward with the Boardman Dam and get that project fully funded and through design prior to finishing the design on Sabin. So there are still decisions to be made at Sabin, and that may be one of them that comes out of it. There are 2 viable historic channels within Sabin. One of them goes through the powerhouse, one of them goes through the former powerhouse, or former dam.
Yeah, like I said, I remember, I can't tell you when, because there was a lot of meetings for a lot of months and a number of years, but there was some very extensive discussion about the fact that there was some significant financial benefit to retaining the powerhouse. The problem was then, okay, you still got a building, a structure that you have to maintain and you have to deal with. And I think the consensus at that time was we were better to breach it, remove it, and be done with it once and for all, even though it was probably going to cost us a little more money up front.
Commissioner Lathrop.
I'm interested, the sediment that builds up behind these dams or is there from all logging and stuff, you're going to dig that out and put it somewhere?
We'll be disposing of it within the uplands, within the impoundment. So as we're dewatering, we'll be taking and putting it off to the dewatered areas.
All right, and what's the chances of having a plume of that get into our bay?
Very, very, very little, getting all the way to the bay. Boardman, so the dams themselves obviously act like a sediment sink. They capture a tremendous amount of sediment. Very little comes downstream from them. Same thing can be said for Boardman Lake. If anything were to go through during the construction process, it would end up in Boardman Lake. It would not make it to the bay.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, in terms of volumes, what we're talking about moving into Boardman Lake under the natural conditions, we're speaking about centuries where we're seeing significant advancements of the delta.
Thank you.
Sonny?
One last question. We've been told for years that Boardman Dam is flowing at flow of the river.
Yes.
Do we truly believe that we're not going to get increased water coming down the river, due to a weather storm or those kind of things? Everybody's all concerned about South Airport Road, the Logan's Landing area. I've played soccer there when those soccer fields were ankle deep in water. But the fact is that that's probably one of the biggest concerns that I hear from the community is the concern about whether or not we have the capacity to handle, that 10-year, 100-year, 10-inch flow of water that we get coming out of the sky, like we had basically at the time we were trying to breach the Brown Bridge Dam.
Yes. So the graph on the left here is one of the hydrographs. It's an inflow and outflow hydrograph from the dams. So this is looking at flood conditions passing through Boardman Dam. These hydrographs, there's actually two lines there. It's very difficult for you guys to see, but there's a purple line and a green line. They're pretty much on top of each other. These dams lacked the volume to be able to hold back any significant flow event. And like I said, on top of not having the capacity, they didn't have the legal ability to restrict flow and try and attempt attenuation. But to be honest with you, to check it, we ran scenarios where we tried to attempt retaining flow and attenuating the floods. And even knowing what the hydrograph looked like, it was incredibly difficult to do. And it was an iterative process of modifying the gates to get it just perfect so that you actually attenuated a small amount of flow. And so when I say an iterative process, let's say it took us 10 times. The last time we finally succeeded in attenuating flows, the other 9, we increased the flow during the flood event. So it's not very easy, particularly on such small dams, to try and generate any kind of flood attenuation.
Thank you. That area that you're talking about, Commissioner.
Frank, if you'd come up to the microphone, please.
I just wanted to mention that area that you're talking about down by South Airport is a naturally active floodplain area. So while you have dam structures that don't actually contain the amount of water flowing through them, especially in high flows, as Dan was described, you have an exceptionally wide floodplain. There's 2 sets of culverts, both sides, east and west at South Airport. It's why you don't see under high flows large issues in that area because there's so much room for the water. There's those wetlands to the east. There's a lot of room for the water that comes through that system. Is no longer in a single thread channel. It spreads out and it's activating that floodplain. And that's where you see a negligible change with flows, even in increased flows, because the climate change conditions that we hear about every day and larger storm events. Everything that I understand that the process has looked at shows that area, that delta, or that flat area, that wide access floodplain is sufficient to take any of the flows that we'll see.
Commissioner Merrick?
No, this is phase 2 we're in. Phase 1 was the Brown Bridge.
Correct.
We've got, I think, 3 different areas you talked about. You talked about the bridge, the removal, and the rebuilding. Could you give me the cost of each of those, or is that going to be covered in the next?
So, is that covered on one of your slides? Okay, that's covered on one of first.
Okay, then we will wait.
Pass the buck.
Any other questions?
No, I don't see
I'll hand
any.
it over to Kim from CRA.
I thought I'd start off with the first financial slide, just to give us all an idea of what we've been involved in for so many years. The slide is the total estimated cost of the Boardman Dams project. You can see down there it's around $21 million. This number is really boiled down. You know, it doesn't include all of the feasibility study work and the environmental assessment work that the Corps has done the last several years. It doesn't include the hours that Steve Largent and the Conservation District has put into this project. A lot of us, CRA, the Watershed Center, the tribe, our state and federal agencies, there's a wealth of staff time, you know, with these folks that have gone into this project over the last, I don't know, 10 years now, 8 years. I was thinking just yesterday, you know, we call this a project, I call this a project, but really it's like an enterprise or a venture or an adventure. It has so many facets, it's, I think, almost too basic to just call it a project. But anyway, with these financial spreadsheets, please note that you'll see the word estimated often because that's what we have to call them until they're over and done with and we really know what they costed. I'm also dating a lot of these so that if numbers do get fine-tuned and if we do get bids months or a year down the road and we need to change those numbers, you know, I can track the date that I provide you a first number and so we can keep track of how these numbers might evolve over time. So starting at the top with Brown Bridge Dam, that $5.7 million, that did include design, permitting, removal, restoration, and I also included project management costs in that line item.
Kim?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
I can wait till she's done.
Oh, all right.
Our next phase of work is obviously Boardman Dam, Cass Road Bridge. That's $11.6 million. As you can see, we're in the most financially significant part of the project, and to me that means we adopt the outlook that we need all hands on deck to make this part a reality. Our next site will be Sabin. Dan just shared with you the 2.1-ish million that they're estimating for the removal phase. I added $325,000 that's still needed to conclude the design for that. And then with Union Street, I put 2017-TBD, to be determined for that site. And I think the cost is also, you know, fairly to be determined as well because the cost will be driven a lot by the modifications that end up being agreed upon by all of the partners. Project management, monitoring, communications, that's been about $250,000 annually. And so that's where we're at.
What's the definition of ongoing?
Yeah, that's been an annual cost.
I mean, in the future.
In the future, about the same?
Dr.
Yeah.
Johnson?
So I just want to make sure I'm clear that those numbers don't reflect the true cost because there's other costs that you can't quantify that are not in there? Is that what you were saying?
These costs, I think, are the costs that we need to focus on as we fundraise.
Well, I mean, I would like to
So-
know what the total cost is at some point, and what was spent on it would be nice for the public, I think, to know also, to say, look, yeah, we're saying now it's 7.1 million, how much more was spent, you know,
Are
on
you
the
asking?
whole thing, so.
Yeah, are you asking about the 11.693?
No, I know where you got to that, but I'm just
Okay.
saying, it seemed like you said that a lot of the cost that's been incurred already isn't included in this estimate. And
Yeah, that's more of, you know, the partners' staff time, volunteer efforts, you know, the Army Corps work as well. I mean, if we wanted to, we could go back to the initial study that was done to help reach the decision of removing dams in the first place.
And all, I guess,
Yeah.
like for me, it just says that if that's not the true cost, if there were other costs incurred, that needs to be, I guess, available so the public really knows what the true total cost will be or has been when it's all done, so. I know some of it, the volunteer work, you can't quantify and that kind of stuff, but,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, ultimately, you've spent more money than what's gonna be shown on there, so.
Commissioner Crawford, then Commissioner Wheelock.
The $250,000 annually ongoing? Mm-hmm. Whose expense is that? That's ours?
That's been collectively covered by mostly the grants.
But as it goes forward, you said it will continue on?
Yes,
That
and that is
annual-
mostly grant funded.
Okay.
The city and the county have both given $20,000 annually since 2010 to help cover that.
Okay.
So we pay the grant.
Commissioner Wheelock?
Kim, I tried exhaustively the other night to get through, find all my old notes, but there's a couple things that I maybe you have the numbers for. Number one, the Federal Energy Commission gave us a recommendation, or at that point, we got a estimate of what it would cost to upgrade the spillways to be able to retain the dams. And that was a huge number, and I can't remember, 10 million is what sticks in my head, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure that's exactly correct. And secondly, I looked to see if I could find where the initial estimates for the breaching of Brown Bridge were, because we now have done Brown Bridge, we know what it cost us to do that. How realistic were our estimates going forward, now that we've done the work? How close are we? How, you know, that gives us some feeling of how good our estimates are moving forward into Boardman and Saban.
Brown Bridge, we completed the project within budget.
We were below budget, correct?
And I think
Yes,
Slightly
under
below.
budget, under schedule on time, and with no accidents, no lost time accidents.
And no contingency money was put into that. We didn't end up using any of this contingency either, if I understand that correct?
contingency money. No, I think we did have some change orders through the project for additional work, but again, that was, we managed that.
Like, the point is, you know, we estimated that 5% contingency, and I don't believe we touched any of that money either, if my memory is correct. So we were significantly under budget for the Brown Bridge portion, even with all of the difficulties that we had during the course of the project. So, you know, that gives us a better feeling that the estimates that we have before us are truly realistic numbers of what it's going to take to make this happen. I don't expect any big surprises.
And, you know, we went through a rigorous qualifications-based selection process for the engineer. Several members of the implementation team sat on that panel. So we should feel confident in the engineer that we selected. And that's part of the reason why I wanted them to bring the conceptual design to you folks tonight, so that you could get to know your engineering team and see what kind of work they've been doing the last 8 months. So.
Commissioner Karopa?
Gonna have to go back to the 250,000 a year. Gonna need more information. How long is ongoing, like 50 years?
We sign a contract with the county, I believe, correct? Every year, the amount is identified in that, and it's also identified how it's covered. And honestly, it's mostly covered with grants that we secure for this project.
The $20,000 a year that you refer to, I saw it on the breakdown of the funding for this. Where's that found in our budget?
It's, I don't know the line item number, but it's in there. It's in the general fund.
It's in the general fund, and it's 20 grand a year for the foreseeable
It's
future.
been, from 2010, we've been putting it in, the city's been putting it in.
Mhm.
We send it to the CRA at the beginning of the year, and they basically raise funds for the project and take their fees, their administrative fees, are included in the cost that they're submitting, and they're taking their fees out of that. So as long as the project still requires their efforts as project managers, we're going to be paying them because nobody else is doing the work. I mean, they're hired by us to do that work, and the implementation team has been relying on CRA for a lot of the heavy lifting in the fundraising.
So it could be 50 years if you're still doing river restoration work and species.
No, I think we'll have these
identification
dam
and sediment
removals done
removal.
before that.
When
It's my personal
when
goal to
Kim's
have them
daughter,
done before I
who's 8,
retire.
is now taking over for her. We have no definition of longevity in the contract with CRA on this payment.
They're annual.
It's annually renewed by the County Board of
Yep.
Commissioners.
No, by the implementation team
By the
and by me. Because the Board of Commissioners authorized me to sign.
Same for the
everything.
City Commission.
Hmm?
Same for the City Commission.
City Commission isn't contracting with CRA. They did. The CRA did the brown badge, right?
The City Commission does not contribute annually at this time.
No, they do.
Yep,
They do.
$20,000 a year.
Okay.
There was a commitment to make sure that the city and the county were involved in the entire process, start to finish. The fact that Brown Bridge came out first because it was the upriver bridge, upriver portion, didn't exempt the city from participating
Right.
going forward through the entire
Well,
process.
and they are dam number 4 as well.
Exactly.
So they finish it on. But as of this time, every year, the city pays $20,000, the county pays $20,000 for the foreseeable future until at some time the project is deemed finished. Okay?
And we're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Traverse City. We cover 13 counties. We work on a dozen rivers. We are applying for federal, state, foundation, individual, all types of grants and donations for all of our river projects. And so we do put most of that money towards implementation, on-the-ground work, design work, but some of it, yes, does go towards CRA project management costs. We have a staff of 9 folks, and we're supported by grants, contributions, memberships. That is the nature of our organization, not just here, but throughout our region. So let's take that 11.693 and break it down. Let's see, let's start with the first row, 2014 to 2015. The design and permitting phase of Boardman Dam and Cass Road Bridge. Andy, you had asked about that earlier. The $300,000-ish that's been spent on Cass Road design. That's part of that $1,235,000. And that's under contract with AECOM right now. If you go to the next column, it says committed funds, and we have the exact same amount committed. And so we have been successful in fundraising for that design cost. And this really is huge. I mean, I've been working for my organization for a long time, and just in the last 6 to 8 years, we finally have seen some of our major grantors say, okay, we won't just pay for on-the-ground work, we'll help you pay for design. And that has been a blessing for an organization like ours because we can't really apply for construction dollars until we have some design done and we know what something is going to cost. So that 1.2 committed is an accomplishment. If we go down to 2016, that's when Cass Road Bridge could be constructed. The estimated cost, as Dan had presented, was $3,080,000. That did include the contingency. The committed funds of $2.8 million, that is the MDOT grant that the Road Commission currently has. That leaves needed funds of the $207,000, as Dan had mentioned, and that included both the 5% and then that 50-some thousand in staking that MDOT does not typically pay for. The date those funds should be committed by is between April 24th and August 21st of 2015. And then if we go down to Cass Road Bridge Construction Engineering, the estimate from AECOM, if they were to do it, is $275,000. And those funds are needed. There is not anything committed at this time for that. Ideally, those funds are committed by this November. That's when ideally the construction engineer is under contract to do the project. Yes.
I thought I had an email a couple days back from Dan that said that they were sending it to the road commission and they were going to review it, and MDOT, before they took it, once the road commission approves those plans and they are transferred to MDOT, they want the obligation for the funding at the same time.
And that is for the 5% match and the staking. The construction engineering, it's really the road commission's game. It's really their choice, who that is.
Select, yeah.
And, and what that contract is going to look like.
But to get the MDOT process started, April 20.
Sorry, yeah. Yes, so the local match, the 5% plus the construction staking or contractor staking is required at the time that the final documents are submitted to MDOT. That initiates the obligation period. So those,
Which is estimated for when?
anytime between April 24th and August 21st.
But the sooner the better?
The sooner the better. The more lead time you have, the better your prices are going to be.
Okay.
Dr. Lathrop.
So, I'm not really good at math. How much money is the county board going to have to come up with between April 24th and August 21st?
480,000.
Between that time, $207,000 or $208,000. And that's what's required for the commitment for
275 is later.
for the just for the match, just to start the process with MDOT.
I was hearing the number $400,000.
Total.
Right.
Total. So I want to hear the total number.
I happen to have it here. It's $482,843.
408, almost $500,000.
By the end of 2015, this
Right.
year's budget.
Yes.
So this board has to come up with about $500,000 to make this thing happen. Is that right?
$482,843.
Am I wrong?
No, you are exactly right, and I was not going to bring this up this evening, but I bring it up every time I see the road commission. And tonight should not be an exception to the rule. I am looking for a discussion at some point in time. It's not on this evening's agenda, but I am looking for a discussion at some point in time to partner with County Road to help fund this project. I can silence
went
a
over
room.
like that.
Let's just not all jump up and applaud at the same time, guys.
Not on the agenda, we wouldn't
Well,
want to discuss it.
I have another comment too, that's a fine discussion to have. I have no problem with that discussion.
Thank you.
But we also have to remember that there's more cost involved in that bridge. We have no money to tie the bridge into the road in that number.
Is that true?
Is that correct?
It's embedded in. Is it in the touchdown points? It will tie it in then? Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And does that include tearing down the building?
No.
No,
That is
that's
part of
just the
river
road.
restoration
This is the
and
bridge.
project.
That's just the bridge, the road across the bridge.
All right.
Dr. Johnson?
Oh,
Did you
no,
raise your hand? All right.
I get the presentation finally.
Yes,
Commissioner Merritt?
thank you for emailing that, for the blind.
Yes,
here.
we appreciate that, yes. The
482
blind, yes.
and change is what the county at this point has to pay to connect the road, repair the road, and everything. There's no other, at this point, known hidden.
That is the cost for what we're calling the MDOT project, which is tie-down point, tie-to-tie-down point, including the bridge. but that's just associated with the proposed bridge. So
But not the dam
$482,000.
removal portion.
Not the dam removal portion.
Commissioner McKellar.
Got me out of the weeds, didn't you?
I didn't figure you could sit there all night.
You know me too well, Sonny. Well, you know, we had to come together. I mean, I wish we had done this every 6 months, frankly, and just smooth this out instead of having this be like too much to swallow at once. These guys have done a phenomenal job taking what I consider to be spaghetti and trying to make it nice, straight lined for us. It still is two distinctly separate projects. Okay? But being smart, the people ahead of us, some were there at the time. Sonny was there. I think you were there.
I would have never voted for this.
And Christine wasn't there. But the fact of the matter is, even before, I'm talking even before June of 13, to tie them together, you know, almost like a tie-barred thing, that one can't happen without the other. But that's not true. Make that clear. They're not, they can be exclusive. But it makes more sense financially to put them together and work together in the community. And it does certainly make it better as an overall project that, you know, the grant was secured from the Road Commission through the state, the funds. That makes it a lot easier for this group to go out and say, hey, look it, you know, we've got the bridge, which most of the organizations they deal with don't want anything to do with the bridge. They're into removing the dams and restoring the river. So, like I've said time and time again for years, that it's easier to get money and grants that come into our area to help us out, that we don't have to come up with the money for removal of the dam and restoration. So I think that we're on the right path. We can have another conversation sooner than later.
Yes.
Okay? But the idea coming out of this shouldn't be, oh, aha, now what we can do is, here's the fail-safe, we can pull the pin and watch this thing go away. It's not going to happen on a road commission's watch. Not going to happen. So we're going forward with a bridge, because we're never going to get a bridge for this price tag out of our pocket ever again. Guaranteed. That's all of us. So, you know, I think that we should let them finish their presentation here and bring it all back around together for us. But a lot of good things have come out of this and will continue to come out of this. And I'll tell you what, there's out in Pennsylvania, there was a group that did a river restoration that was huge that I can remember, and I don't recall anything quite as big as this that I can find, and a community collectively coming together. And we need a win in this community like this, of this magnitude.
So if we move along to 2016, 2017, we have Boardman Dam removal and channel restoration on the list. The estimated cost, as Dan had said, was $7.1 million at this time. Our committed funds, just for those, just for that implementation work, is $2.2 million. That leaves us still needing 4.9. The last 6 months, a total of $2.3 million has been submitted in proposal requests to funders, and I'll show you in the next slide who those folks are. So, in the last 6 months, we've been working towards reducing that $4.9 million right now that's still needed for the dam. Ideally, those funds, all of those funds, that $7.1 million should be secured by October of next year. If we wanted to do the dam removal and the channel work in 2017, it would be ideal to bid that work out the previous fall, just for the reasons Dan had mentioned of cost efficiency, getting on contractors' to-do lists when they're not quite too busy yet. So for those committed funds that we have right now, those funds that are paying for design, we've got $2.2 million set aside for the dam removal part. Here's the picture of people who are funding that work. There's over a dozen. And then at the bottom there, of course, the Road Commission has the MDOT Local Bridge Grant, strictly for bridge construction. And so again, I'll restate it. You might get tired of me saying it, but a lot of these folks help to pay for the consolidated design of both the dam removal and the bridge. And that is, again, really important and valuable. We should not take that for granted. So our pending proposals that I had mentioned that we've submitted over the last 6 months. You can see a lot of federal folks here. The Grand Traverse Band continues to be heavily vested in this project. They've submitted 2 requests themselves. You can see the words Great Lakes, fish, habitat. These funders are mostly interested in channel work and restoring, reconnecting a river. That is what they're most excited about. We should be hearing about these proposals between April and October of this year if they're successful or not.
May I ask?
Yes, Commissioner McKellar, you may.
Thank you. I have a concern that these funders, as they're watching, as much as they're excited for the project, are starting to see if people waver too, or seeing this thing starting to teeter a little bit. How is that going to impact this 4.9 that we're trying to collect? I mean, you know, we at the Road Commission have a vested interest in the restoration of the river too. And I think all of us do. But my concern is, are we projecting the wrong message here at a critical mass time? Is that, are you concerned at all that if we don't get this resolved sooner than later, that we could impact this potential?
Sure. I mean, we asked these funders permission to spend money on a consolidated design of all the work needed at the river there, and they said yes. And so I hope we go forward with construction of all of the aspects that we've designed for the last 8 months. You know, as a grant proposal writer, one of the most important parts of proposals is how you get rated on, do you have collaboration? How many partners do you have involved? Do you know your partners? Have you and your partners looked at your sites and decided what you want to do? Is everyone helping to pay for the work? They love that. And I would say that's one of the top 3 items we get ranked on with all of our grant proposals, whether they're federal, state, local, whatever. They don't want to see one Superman hero doing a project by themselves. They want to see everybody, a strong network of partners that are going forward.
Kim, then how confident would you be if this deal on the bridge thing was put to rest?
Put to rest, you
Yeah,
mean resolved?
this 5% match and all the gray, you know, there's soft money in this, and I understand that. But how much would that help you guys going forward then, and also with your people that are contributing? I mean, is that going to help move this thing forward now?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. When we do what we say we're going to do, that's only good. And for the person who's been submitting grant reports,
better?
It's even better. It makes my job much more pleasant.
Dr. Lathrop.
Mark, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, and I'm doing this in a good humored way.
Were you asking him if he was making a motion, or?
Oh, no.
Now, wait a minute, don't start that.
I think I heard you say that this bridge is going to be built. Road Commission's going to do it. You're going ahead with it. That you have the power to do it, and you're doing it.
I'm only one board member. But
Good answer.
the way I look at it, it would be foolish to not take the money to build the bridge that we need. If we didn't have a dam there, wouldn't we still need to replace that bridge? I hate to answer your question with a question, but isn't that a fact?
Listen, I like the bridge, but I just...
I know, I heard you say it the other night.
What I like is that you guys are saying this thing's going in, and that helps the momentum. Someone's making a decision. This
We
thing's
have to
going
go
in.
forward. I mean, at this point in time, we have to continue forward motion because we can't send a message to MDOT that we're not interested. And this is a huge grant.
No, I have people on this, friends on this board, and people in the audience that I love and respect, but I am for this bridge. And this project, I don't know how we're gonna come up with the $500,000.
Well, I have some ideas.
Yeah.
So she has told us, yeah. You know.
Dr. Johnson.
And I just want to be clear that, I mean, we owe the county a duty to look at these numbers. We cannot just sit here and accept everything you're telling us and life is good and life is grand and we're not going to get this if we all ask for numbers. We're asking for numbers. The county will be on the hook. Road Commission won't be on the hook for several $1 million for removing dams. That's why we're asking for numbers. It's not necessarily we're for or against or whatever. Personally, we're committed, I think, to remove the dams. I don't see any feasible reason to try to, re-engineer that whole thing. It would cost a tremendous amount of money. And I know it'll look wonderful, but we do owe the county and our members of the county the due diligence to look at this responsibly and say, all right, we're going to need this amount of money. Where's it all coming from? Because if it's not all coming from donors, we have a big problem.
Boy, don't we though?
Yeah, and I'll follow up.
And I just wanted to clarify that just because we're asking for numbers, I would
No
think
one's
the
pulling the plug on
donors
anything.
should be smart enough to realize that we're not saying yay, nay, or whatever, but we just want to know what's the cost.
Commissioner Nelson, then Commissioner McKellar.
Yeah, this dam is going to be removed. When this dam is removed, a vital local transportation link across the river is going to be lost. We need to replace it. It would be irresponsible not to replace it. It's the only responsible thing to do. I support it. We've been partners with the county commission. The road commission's been partners with the road commission since 2013 when we sat here. The county commission at the time sat with us. We had a long, thoughtful discussion, and there was a consensus that we'd go forward with replacing the Cass Road Bridge at that time. Since that time, as has been noted, some $300,000 of donor money has been spent to design this bridge. We have the responsibility to move forward. For one person, I'm very supportive of partnering and continuing that partnership with the county commission in finding the funding to do that.
I appreciate that immensely, Commissioner Nelson. Commissioner
Yeah.
McKellar.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Commissioner Johnson is that we as well want to get to the final number for our aspects of the project, because our aspect of the project affects your aspect of the project. And we also understand that your part of the project is millions, okay, beyond ours, potentially 2-3 times, okay? So that's where we're at, and we have a responsibility as well. As I noted earlier, we will, on a lot of the staking and the surveying and stuff, we will more likely be bidding that out. Am I correct on that, Jim? And is that we're going to be going to try to get the best value for this project that we can. Absolutely. So I think we are in agreement on that one for sure.
Commissioner Coropa.
Well, probably as the most misquoted person in this room.
Oh, no.
I'm gonna try, at least on this thing. This isn't about CRA or the engineering firm. It isn't about the dam removal project. It isn't about the history of the river. I'm a really outspoken supporter of the dam removal project, have been since its inception. This is about 7 people who were elected, the only ones that were elected in this room other than Commissioner Richardson and Supervisor Quorum. But other than that, the 7 of us were elected to look at the numbers. Of the 12 people sitting at this table, 1 was here. 1 was here when we discussed these numbers originally on this project. So to be surprised that a group of commissioners that were elected and their job is to look at a budget dare to ask what something cost was shocking to me. How that warranted editorials and front page photos and all kinds of accusations, and I will never understand. The reason why we're confused is because, and I'm asking you as commissioners too, imagine if you got elected and you came into office and every week you meet, which is what we do, and we discuss things like $400 picture frames and $1,200 raises for people in the courts. And we discuss pretty much every penny because that's our job. We're stewards of taxpayers' money. And you find out that almost $500,000 has to be in your budget that year. I am perplexed how a project that has had a timeline for over a decade, that we knew a bridge was part of the project, that we knew we were committed to a match, that we knew we were building this bridge. How did a budget get passed for 2015 with not one penny delegated to this bridge? I have been asking this question since January. I have been put on the line and accused of all kinds of things, yet I'm still waiting for my question. Where's the money? Where is the $482,000 that's due in the fiscal year of 15? Now, when I make a decision on the board and people watch on the TV and I vote against a $400 picture frame, somebody emails me and says, how dare you? Nobody cares that I'm asking about a $500,000 payment to a bridge. I don't want to argue about whether this bridge is happening. I don't want to argue about the engineering and the construction stage. I just want one person to tell me where's the $500,000 in the budget. It's not there. We argued about every penny in that budget. I sat through painful budget hearings last year, listening to people talk about all this stuff. This whole thing wasn't a referendum on the fundraising job done by CRA or of the engineering work and all the devotion of the watershed and the rest of the environmental groups that have been a part of this. I'm just waiting for somebody to tell me where the $500,000 is. Does anyone know?
I have an idea where we're going to get some of it.
But we're right now in a
that.
contract with the road commission that says that they don't pay anything. We went into fiscal year 15 with that contract solid. It was signed in 2013. It's a binding contract. It says their only contribution is the MDOT grant. So therefore, anything above and beyond the MDOT grant, I understand obviously the give and take of the funds on there, but we're roughly guessing it's about a little less than $500,000. It's March. We're talking about April. I see April 24th on there. Well, I haven't voted for any budget change or allocations. I mean, I have argued about a $3,000 software thing or whatever, but I haven't talked about a $500,000 bridge. So how do we write a check on April 24th for $482,000 on behalf of the citizens of Grand Traverse County?
They need to be committed. They need to be acknowledged that they are likely. If the bridge is constructed in 2016, which is the plan right now, they will be spent in 2016.
But it says committed by, so do
Committed.
you mean that it would be part of the 2016 budget?
It'll have to be.
Mr. Bender?
But we don't
you
do
had
the
your hand
budget
up?
by
Yeah,
April
she wants an
24th to
answer. I'll
August
give her one.
21st.
Hang
We
in
don't
there.
do that.
Okay, Mr. Bender?
Well, when I came on board in 2012, long before that, a commitment was made to take dams out, and there was discussion of how we're going to do this bridge, and the Corps of Engineers did a bunch of work. They decided they didn't need to pull out our powerhouse. That wasn't their project. They didn't need to do anything with our road. That's a local concern. That's not our problem. Somewhere along the line, we all got together with the road commission and said, well, we're going to make sure that we replace the Cass Road Bridge. We're going to keep Cass Road open. That was a decision that was made in 2013. No money was set aside at that time because up until, I would say, November of last year, we weren't really sure whether we were going to raise the funds for that whole project because all this time, funds have been raised for the whole project now. But when you get to this point in the process and it's like now it's time to submit plans to MDOT and you've got $2.3 million collected right now toward the whole project.
Dam removal?
Yeah, dam removal.
Yes.
But they're for funders that want to pay for dam removal and river restoration, not
Not a
for
bridge.
the whole project. The Fry Foundation was willing to help us, who gave us the flexibility to do some things with the money. The Rotary Charities specifically wanted to make sure that that bridge was open and it was had habitat and pedestrian crossings and so on and so forth, gave us money for that. But until about November of last year, I didn't know that that $480,000 was going to be like something you had to come up with, or it wasn't going to happen. Okay, so that's the answer to your question. That's why it's not in the 2015 budget, because nobody really knew that until late last year. Because we're fundraising, and, you know, the commitment has been made that we're going to take this bridge out. But the commitment that hasn't been made is we're going to pay whatever it takes. And the board did make that commitment in 2009. And they made it again in 2013 on the bridge. They just didn't specify where the money was going to come from and when we were going to appropriate it. We do have, you know, I mean, last night you spent $120,000 that you didn't have in the budget on the prosecutor's software system. Sorely needed software system. Long overdue. You know, the county's not destitute. We actually got our budget pretty much in order. These are big hits, but they're one-time hits. You know, if you have a project you have to do and you have to come up with a bunch of money, I mean, you thought you were going to spend $1.3 million at the end of last year. You ended up spending close to $300,000. That money's in your fund balance. So you have money. You also have you have a laundry list of projects that need to be funded, that should be funded, that haven't been funded. So it's no different than any other year. So this is just one of those projects that time's up, got to come up with the money now. And the commitments have been made, and now it's now it's time to either put up or stop the project.
Commissioner Wheelock, then Dr. Johnson, and then Commissioner McKellar.
I guess the point that I would make, and David pretty much stated most of it, up until late November, early December of last year, I think all of us thought that the fundraising was going to go to the overall project. You know, I don't think any of us had any idea that a specific piece, that being the Cass Road Bridge, could not be included in that project. We had some commitments from the Army Corps of Engineers and some different things. Some of that worked out, some of it didn't. I'm sure Carl's going to tell us more about where their participation is going to be before the evening's out. So, you know, I think exactly what the amount, I think there was a huge commitment to complete this project. And I know that we all knew there was going to be a cost. We just didn't have a number for that cost, you know, and, you know, now we have a number for the cost. I think we're still committed to complete the project. You know, at least I am, from my perspective, to complete the project. You know, we've been around the block before, and I've sat in this chair a while, and I've seen us have to come up with some pretty sizable pieces of money. I remember $250,000 in December one year just to make the child care fund balance, you know, and it all involved because one family had some kids that had to go to special places to be housed for a while, you know, and we had to find $250,000 in December of one year just to balance the child care fund. We will find the funding in our budget to do this, and David's right. You know, we have contingency funds, we have tax equity funds, we have different places that we can borrow money from ourselves and do this. I do absolutely appreciate this opportunity to have this discussion, because I think it's good for all of us to sit back and look at where we're at and where we've been. You know, I tell people all the time, you need to understand where our past in order to plan for our future.
Yes.
And I think if nothing else tonight, we have the opportunity to talk about how we got to where we are. You know, one of the really interesting pieces to me is the fact that, you know, 10 years ago, we put together estimates as to what it was going to cost to modify these 4 dams, take out 3 and modify the 4th one. And the commitment was made to go ahead and take out Brown Bridge, breach the ban, put everything back. All right, there are 2 reasons that I was real supportive of that. Number one, it told us real easily whether or not our estimates were correct. And number 2, it give the community an opportunity to see what the river would look like once we did this. Both of these things were very successful. We were under budget, we didn't spend our contingency, and I do believe that everyone that goes to Brown Bridge will absolutely believe that the river is better today than it was when the dam was there.
Okay, taking over while she's gone. Doctor?
A couple things. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that 120,000 we voted last night, I thought that was in the capital fund.
Yeah, but it wasn't
Yeah.
But it's still not budgeted
But-
money.
budgeted money, right?
And basically, we're gonna be doing a shell game with this right now anyway. Just gonna say we're committing, and we're not gonna be spending any of that this year, are we?
Some of it.
Okay.
I think some of the construction engineering will start after August.
It depends on when the construction start date is. MDOT actually bids this project out. I'm sure they'll do it, in cooperation with the road
I
commission.
think, like I said, it'll just give us some time to.
Sure.
Okay, now, Mark, you're next.
Thank you. That's kind of where I was going to, Bob, is that with the committed funds, that's the trigger point to get this thing moving. But it sounds like if we needed to, or the way it worked, partial funds could be allocated initially, and then in a budget cycle, the other funds, and you could break it up into manageable pieces, is what I'm understanding the way this is staging out. So in a way, this isn't like you didn't know it was coming and here's a bill for $500,000. This is the natural juncture of where I think we would hear this. Okay? So from a finance perspective, it is time to start making that decision. So the other board, last year, county board and the road commission, couldn't commit to a number of which they didn't know. We have now arrived at it.
Same board, just different individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to point out that we haven't allowed this to move forward without the funding being secured. That's what this point is that we're at. I mean, before, as far as the design went, we had the funding, we moved forward with the design. Now we're getting to the piece where we need the funding for this, and we've stopped and said, we need to stop and get a funding source, or we are stopping. This project stops until we find the funding. And that's the way we proceeded on everyone, and I really appreciate the fact that CRA has been very mindful of that, not proceeding unless the funds were in hand.
Dr. Lathrop?
Well, I remember the number when because I was here last year, and I remember you talking, and I looked at the video several times, and the number was 150 plus change. 150 plus engineering costs. I never heard $500,000. But I'm going to say that doesn't matter. We have to build this bridge. Our community needs it. It's not just the east-west corridor, it's the north-south corridor. It gives us protection against what might happen on Airport Road. We need crossings, multiple crossings over that river. And I think we owe it to the community to replace this bridge. So we've got to gird up our loins and do this.
All that having been said, at some point in the near future, I would like to schedule a meeting, again, a joint meeting with County Road, and I would like to discuss sharing the cost. In spite of what Commissioner Wheelock says, well, we can always find the money somewhere, the fact of the matter is we do not have $482,000 laying around. If you take a look at the 2015 budget, it isn't pretty. 2016 is going to be even less pretty. So I do want to have a candid discussion, and as I remind the Road Commission repeatedly, when they did not have money, Grand Traverse County bonded so that they could fix roads, and that was general fund dollars. Commissioner Brown.
You did bond, and we did pay back. Let's not forget that.
We split the cost
Okay.
50-50, Commissioner Brown.
All right.
50-50, and that was a lot of money.
In our budget also this year, there is no line item, as is in yours, for this. So we will certainly have to go back and see, and I can't speak for the rest of the members, but where our budget
There
is
is
at.
another way to do it, and that is to certainly front the money and have you participate as partners in 2016, 2017. I would not want to hit you up in 2015 when you've already got your budget set, and I understand what that is. I mean, you have your projects, you have your work lined up, you have your bids out, but that doesn't, and yes, Commissioner McKellar?
Are you sure you want to sit down to the table with us again? Because we're pretty shrewd. We got a contract that says we're not paying anything. Just had to point it out.
And it warrants a second
It's
look.
like, oh.
I must have read that contract 6 times.
I know.
Like,
Well,
what? How did
you guys-
anyone pull this off?
Your board appointed some fairly shrewd commissioners. You should be glad we are.
Well,
I would like that deal.
if we want to back that up, Mark, I can remember that we made a commitment for $35,000 for Lafreniere Road too, and then I missed a meeting, and all of a sudden that number went up exponentially, you know.
Times 10?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Moving forward, please.
You know, Commissioner Kropa, and then we should really let Kim finish her presentation.
One quick thing. I think we should take note. I'm going to say I agree with Commissioner Wheelock. Because, I know.
Write it down.
God is recording this.
We do look at our history to not repeat itself, and with the fact that 1/12 of our board has the history and the rest of us are here, I don't want to repeat this again. The Phase 2 of the Boardman Dam Removal Project is almost more than double of Phase A is the bridge, 3-something million. The dam removal and river restoration is 7-something million. I'm not going to sit here when we find out a month after our budget's done that they didn't raise the money. And now we need to come up with maybe $1 million. And then we move on to Phase 3, which is the Sabin removal. And that's another $2+ million. And you know what? We find out a month after we did our budget, you know what? We didn't raise the fund. Basically, we wrote a blank check, regardless of what Commissioner Wheelock even said it. We didn't have the numbers. Commissioner McKellar said it. We don't have the numbers. So I want to do the best that I can on behalf of the people that put me in this seat to say, are we going to be surprised with another number after Part B of Phase 2, and then another number at Phase 3. I'll gladly hand over Phase 4's surprise to the city of Traverse City after their dam. I think we've taken it at the county here, but we're looking at a $3 million project. We're fronting $500,000. I do understand and respect the fact that this part of the project is a bridge, which is less likely to be funded than a river restoration project, and I appreciate that. However, when I was looking at that timeline, October 2016 for funds committed for a $7.1 million project, that's a hefty fundraising challenge for anyone.
Yes.
So not to say that there isn't a faith here, because obviously you've shown your ability to fundraise, but let's just say by October 2016 that $7.1 million isn't raised. We all know where you come back to. I mean, the county owns the Boardman Dam. It was a hell of a deal for $1. Now we may be on the hook for millions in removing these dams for the dollar deal.
Thank you, consumers.
Yes. So I'm more interested, I'm not trying to pull the plug on anything. What I'm saying is, okay, we have this budget situation to deal with, we have to find $500,000, et cetera, et cetera. How do we look forward as responsible stewards of money and saying, in a year, we might be sitting at this board doing the exact same thing because the fundraising isn't there. That's not your fault. That's not your situation. That's more to the political board. We need to just be aware, and that is what I have appreciated and thank very much the time that CRA and the IT has taken to educate me in the last couple months with all of my numbers questions. Not to pull the plug on the current phase, because I am a huge supporter in finishing this dam removal project. My question is for Part B. I'm concerned about the Part B fundraising. I'm concerned about Phase 3. And so we need to, like Dave said, you didn't know till November. When we knew, essentially there was some number, but 2 of the commissioners I've asked that were sitting here in 2013 did not anticipate $500,000. I think that's fair to say.
That's certainly fair to say.
So we're talking about a phase of a project that's more than double. the current phase that we're dealing with. So I'm just throwing out a number that it could be double. We could be looking at $1 million next year that we're short. I'm not going to sit here and look ridiculous. You know, I'm gonna say it now. Let's plan and talk about this and communicate and decide how we are going to take care of this project that we committed to a dozen plus years ago. We just need to ask the questions. It's not a conspiracy to end a project. It's just planning. If you knew as a house owner that your roof was gonna fail in 3 years, wouldn't you start thinking about it now and putting the money aside? We owe that same diligence to the tax fund that we do to our own checking account. That's all. I want to talk about the fundraising potential for Part B of Phase 2.
Yeah, I have a couple more slides on that.
We will let Kim finish, and then we will chat amongst ourselves.
Carl needs to talk as well.
Oh, Carl.
Yeah, Carl still has to
He's
talk
got
as well.
a big checkbook.
Well, I guess I'll go backwards and, I'll repeat what Sunny said. Appreciate where we've been to appreciate where we are.
Right.
And, folks, we could have been here a year ago asking for $300,000 in design funds. But the IT did a good job in fundraising, working with our funders, saying, please help pay for a consolidated design of these two sites. So progress has been made. I know $480,000 is a lot of money, but it could have been more.
Could have been $780,000, which no one has expected.
Yeah, and this has been a learning experience for me, or a lesson for me, because I think it was June of 13 that I was here, and that we talked about the bridge, and we said the 5%, $150,000 plus the engineering. Never again will I say that. Because I guess my bias is that I know engineering is hundreds of thousands of dollars. I guess that's my bias. I've been doing this for a long time. But in the cover letter from MDOT to the Road Commission, it states all of those stipulations. In the award letter for that $3 million, it says MDOT will pay for 95% of construction. You, the local folks, are responsible for 5%. You are responsible for design engineering and construction engineering. So, the information's been out there, and we have made progress, though. We have. Okay, so let's move ahead. So just, the committed funds, we have a plethora. We have over a dozen sources. And then we do have that one sizable grant for your bridge construction. Our pending proposals, as I think I already mentioned this, a lot of Great Lakes heavy initiatives, people looking for fish habitat, wildlife restoration. Again, tribal sources continue to be very significant and helpful. Future funding opportunities, just what Elisa said. So we'll be finding about those pending proposals between next month and probably October of this year at the latest. Funding opportunities outside of those, we are reaching the threshold of our federal funders. So, and that's natural, for any river project really. And so it makes us diversify how we're doing our work, how we're paying for our work. And so it's time really to look for more local support, more private support. Couple funders are interested in funding another grant for still Boardman Dam. We've talked with Great Lakes Fishery Trust. The tribe has talked with Bureau of Indian Affairs. That's exceptional. I've never had two grants for one project from the same person. I don't know if that makes sense to you. It's one grant for one project. Let's move on to the next site, please. But what that tells me is that they're excited about this and that they recognize that this phase is pretty darn expensive. So milestones moving forward, working through the match requirements for the MDOT grant. Again, Dan, we purposely put that 5% in staking and that construction engineering in 2 line items, because really those 2 line items could be committed at different times this year. That 5% in the staking cost is the most important right now, that's committed and signed for, so that all of that paperwork can be submitted to MDOT and you can, secure that $3 million grant from them. CE is selected ideally by November, and that contract is outlined, signed, and obviously that contract will have a fee in it. So, and again, that $275,000 from AECom and these slides for them to be CE, that is an estimate. You know, if that's bid out, if someone else does that, that can change. Milestones moving forward for the dam removal. What we haven't talked much about, what Carl probably will talk some about, is the environmental assessment that is signed for all 3 dams. That is a major permit requirement. If I were ever to make a general statement about that, we cannot do anything on these next 3 dams until the environmental assessment is signed and approved by the Army Corps of Engineers. That meets the National Environmental Protection Act requirements. That is very significant. The Corps has been working with AECom the last couple of years on that. There is a Corps option out there if we want to proceed with them for the next 3 dams. And so Carl is putting together what's called a project partnership agreement and an integral determination report. And basically those 2 documents define the scope of work that they will work on and also the conditions and the match requirements. And then, I think most importantly, quarterly updates, if not more frequently, from CRA here. You know, we are in the thick of it now. You know, the Cass Road Bridge design is close to completion. AECom's come out with the first crack at design for Boardman Dam removal. You can see from that funding plan that we are full steam ahead. And so this will trigger a lot more communication from us. So if anyone has any feedback for me just on how the numbers were presented, and as we go forward, I don't know if I mentioned I purposely didn't round them or anything like that. I don't know if that's easier to digest or not. And, you know, I'd like to see a closer, more positive working relationship, I think, you know, with these boards here. You know, because there will be, this is a huge project and there will be a lot of change. You know, I just think today I'm working on a $150,000 bridge project with a county south of here, and our bids yesterday came in, and some of the materials were $2,000 higher than what we anticipated. So we, the county, go to our budgets and say, where do we get $2,000? You know, so, and it's not a bad thing, it's just how do we do it? And so I'd like to duplicate that relationship for this project too. So with that, I'll close. Are there any other questions for me? No? Okay, thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you.
We'll send Carl up.
And we'll send Carl up. I think, you know, the Corps option could probably use its own working session, but Carl could be here today, and we at least put together some basic bullets and highlights of what the Corps option would entail.
All right, good evening. Again, I'm Carl Platts. I'm the project manager from the Corps of Engineers. Been personally involved, and the Corps has been involved in this project with the IT, with CRA, with all the stakeholders since about 2006. We've been very involved the last few years. We've put together a very detailed feasibility study. The environmental assessment that Kim had mentioned is a part of that. We are finishing that up right now, ready to request a formal approval of that. Those documents, and the schedule for that, you know, our internal schedule shows that we should be ready to sign what's called the Finding of No Significant Impact, the FONSI, here within the next couple of months. And so ready to move on then to the next phase of the project. As Kim mentioned, it's an option. We've been working concurrently through our feasibility process as the IT and the local groups here have been concurrently working through their own process. And I guess just to kind of go off the slides a little bit, the scope of the core project involves the Boardman, Sabin, and Union Street dams. The recommendations in our report are to remove Boardman Sabin, very much similar to the project as has been prepared locally. and then some additional modifications at the Union Street Dam to allow downstream passage of sturgeon and other target species. What our project does not include is, as already been mentioned, is the removal of Cass Road and construction of the new bridge. Also excluded from our project, as you see on the slide there, is the powerhouse removals. There's already been some discussion of that here tonight. But some of the reasons, the reason for that, the specific reason, is that the Corps is pursuing this project under this Great Lakes Fishery and Ecosystem Restoration Authority. And our authority is pretty specific as to the items that we can federally fund under an ecosystem restoration authority. And, building bridges and roads and things like that are not considered to be a part of that specific authority. Certainly doesn't mean that the Corps doesn't believe it's necessary or anything like that. It's just we can't participate with our federal funding for those types of activities. Moving forward with the Corps option does provide, for federal funding to come through from the Corps of Engineers. 65% of all the planning, design, and construction related costs associated with the project would be a federal responsibility. 35% of the project costs, that would be a non-federal responsibility. And as Kim had mentioned, the next step in our process is to draft and prepare this project partnership agreement, which would then have to be signed with a non-federal sponsor, which would define the roles of both parties, lay out the cost-sharing requirements, and also, given the fact that the local initiative is already moving forward with design, our goal is to not duplicate any efforts that have already been done or are being done. The intent is to use that design that's already been funded locally, give you in-kind credit for those types of activities to the maximum extent that we can, and proceed from there. I don't want to get too deep into the details here. I know it's getting late, and I'm not sure. It's the only slide left, so I guess we could. I'll stay here as long as you want.
Welcome.
I'm not going home tonight. So, but anyway, I mean, I guess I'll stop there. And again, it's a complete separate option to use the Corps, and it'll be up to you to decide whether or not you want to do that. None of this, I'm sure you're all pretty much aware of it, so I don't want to repeat too much stuff. We held a pretty large public information session back in August when our report and the EA was all put out for public review and comment. We've completed all of that follow-up from that process, and so, like I said, we're ready to recommend approval of that, and we expect that to happen here in the next couple of months. So,
Commissioner Wheelock.
First, I want to recognize the assistance, if you will, of the Army Corps of Engineers. I don't believe we would have, we certainly wouldn't have gotten through the whole environmental assessment and all of those issues without their help, and I think it was a little tedious. There were some pretty ugly meetings along the way, but the fact is, we've come a long ways, and we've come that distance by working together. I've always had the question about the 35% match. What can we use as part of that 35% match? We've all come a long ways on our own, and how much of that can we credit toward that 35% match? And that's a question in my mind, and I'm sure someone probably has better answers than I do for it. But we have done a lot of the design work. We in some of this stuff. So how much credit toward that? We've done some fundraising. How much of that will apply toward that 35%?
Yeah, all those numbers are to be determined. That's that integral determination report that's mentioned on the slide there. I'm in the process of initiating that, putting that report together based on some of the numbers and looking at the scope of work, okay, that is associated with the local design effort, making sure that matches up with the scope of work that we would undergo if we did it ourselves. The goal here is to give you as much in-kind credit as practical, and it's just a question of working through the numbers and determining exactly what the scope like I mentioned, of the work is that you're currently doing, and making sure that it complies with federal standards and with the Corps of Engineer requirements. We've had a lot of discussion about that already, so I'm confident that the work that's currently ongoing by AECom, is in line with our requirements. We need to verify that, and again, that report will be coming out, and then that'll form the basis for the recommendation for how much in-kind credit would be appropriately applied to the project.
All right.
I
Any
hesitate to give a number because right now I'm not ready to.
I understand that.
And Commissioner Karopa?
Timeline on choosing the Army Corps option?
Well, as I mentioned, we expect the EA to be, the FONSI to be signed here in the next couple of months, the feasibility report to be approved, and once that happens formally, we're ready to move on to what we call the implementation phase, which is put the detailed design together and then move into construction. With that IDR and the PPA will be drafted up and ready to be discussed and coordinated, negotiated, all that here this summer. And, from our internal schedule, we would be in a position to be ready to execute that agreement later this summer or this fall.
And timeline for the numbers?
For the in-kind crediting and things like that? Yeah, that'll be done here this summer. So we will have a good, I mean, hopefully before that, to be frank.
We could actually have numbers before we make a decision on something?
Well,
Especially
if
with
you're
the
dealing with the
feds.
Corps of Engineers, yes, the numbers will have to be there.
I appreciate that kind of situation.
We're a stickler for that ourselves. So.
Commissioner Merrick?
So, with your option, as a road commissioner, I'm concerned about the road, the bridge. Apparently the powerhouse is part of that issue too. Are we able to coordinate efforts with the Army Corps, or would that other stuff all just have to go away?
If I understand your question correctly, from a Corps standpoint, whether the bridge is built or not built doesn't really affect our plans and our ability to move forward with the project. Certainly it makes sense to coordinate all those efforts, and we are. I mean, we have been for quite some time. Our report, our feasibility report, discusses that and speaks to the different scenarios. The Corps would not recommend something based upon a projected future condition if we didn't have a good. If our ability to move forward was predicated and based upon the bridge needing to be built, we wouldn't be recommending it. We wouldn't be recommending to move forward with our project. The fact of the matter is, we believe that our project, the relocation of the river and breaching of the dams, could happen either way. But again, I'm not going to speak for our agency, but it makes sense, and all the discussion already about the bridge certainly makes sense to, and it will make construction easier, to have that built first. There's no question. So, I guess a roundabout way to answer your question, it should not have an effect either way on the Corps' ability to proceed with that, or for you to proceed with the Corps option. I don't know if I answered it or not.
Dan said.
Yeah, Dan's you talking about with the powerhouse and things like that? Yeah, Dan suggests I speak. We do have an ability to incorporate into the Corps project, things like removing the powerhouse and things like that. It's just that in the agreement you'll see here this summer, if those kind of options are included in the Corps project, they would have to be funded with non-federal money. The Corps, the 65-35 cost share wouldn't apply to those activities. We could still include them in our project, and our construction contractor they could be a part of our construction contract, but they would have to be paid with fully non-federal money. So those kind of options exist as well.
Okay, any other questions for Carl? All right. Seeing none?
Wow.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you very much.
Carl came up from
Next on our agenda is a second opportunity for public comment. Would anyone like to make public comment? Norb, come on up.
Remember, make your notes here. I take exception with a lot of things that were said because I was an advocate for saving the dams. I lost, you guys won. That doesn't alleviate me and my citizen responsibility in some of the questions that I generated in listening to this dialogue, which I am really encouraged by listening to it. You're doing a good job. I think the Road Commission, in my opinion, still has a inherent responsibility to take care of the concrete that's on the road that Cass Road is being used right now, the bridge. I think they have a responsibility for making sure that that gets torn down. It's not a part of the dam. It's a road bridge. My thoughts. I've heard so often that the dollar you guys invested in this property is a bad investment, and I'd like to double your money. I'll give you $2 for it today. And take all the responsibility off your shoulders and alleviate you of $12 million.
Don't tell me.
But I know you have to vote on that, so I'll let you do that. Now that I've lightened it up a little bit, Traverse City borrowed $3.7 million to refurbish those dams in 1984. They paid that revenue bond off. They hired at least 3 people to work on those dams as employers. They put in monitoring systems that they paid for. They generated, I don't know, $50,000 a year out of Brownbridge for themselves, and they paid us 5% a year. Somebody can tell you what those numbers are, but there was a return on investment. Plus we had some nice ponds we could float on and swim in and fish in. Warmer than the river, but hey, you know, it was more comfortable. We don't have that anymore. So it was a good investment. $1 was a good investment, and the reason they got rid of it at the time, consumers' power we're talking about, was coal was cheap, real cheap, and producing electricity was real cheap with coal. And their licenses were up. They didn't want to renew. They didn't want to reinvest. So that was one of the reasons. I'm getting the feeling, and I hope I'll try not to run over. I think we're getting in a situation here. The Corps of Engineers in 2006 said they would remove 3 dams, mitigate the soil, take care of everything. Carl, 7.4 million, 501. Is that about right? In 2006, that is correct. Our share was 35%. For whatever reason, we didn't let them do it. Katrina, call it whatever you want, lack of confidence, we didn't let them do it. And we kept going, and now we're looking at 12 million for the last 2 and however much for the one before that. I think we're going a little bit fast. It feels like we're going a little fast on this bridge because it's a good deal and there's money available, but it's our money, folks. Still our money.
Thank you, Norb. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Mr. Korn, come on down.
I've had the opportunity to speak to the county commission, to the road.
Time's up. Thank you, Mr. Korn.
All right, call for adjournment now? We're good. Let's try that again.
Yeah, that's one more time.
I have for years talked to the county commission, the road commission, and the IT about the idea of abandoning the bridge, that it's not a critical piece of infrastructure unless you happen to be wholeheartedly against the Hartman-Hammond Bridge. So it's very important to John that this bridge is built, and to Nemiak, and to a few of our other friends who are here tonight. But in reality, nobody has to cross the river there. There's other ways to get across the river, and it's not that far. I was glad to hear Kim say that she will never say $150 plus engineering and paperwork again, because I thought that was a big part of the problem with the way this thing came in the back door. The other one was Andy Knott from the Watershed telling you that the $300,000 would be a match for the Army Corps of Engineers because it was all state and local money. Andy stood right here and told the board that, and then they signed a contract. That contract expires in August of this year. There's a substantial completion clause. If there is no substantial completion, there is no payment. What you're doing is donating money right now because you're under no legal obligation to pay the road commission for a job that cannot be done by their own terms, August of 2015. If you do not build a bridge, you do not have to take out Powerhouse. You do not have to create a new roadway. You can save $1 million right there. It's all been a chess game. We're going to give up a chunk of the natural river as long as we can keep the Hartman Avenue from being built. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to make a public comment? Marcia?
Good evening, thank you. I'm Marcia Smith. I'm Executive Director of Rotary Charities. I'm not going to address Mr. Korn's remarks. I do have opinions about those, but I want to address them. What I want to speak to you about is a unique position, and I think Mr. McKellar had referred to that before. Our foundation has been a donor to this project. And I think it's important for the County Board of Commissioners, as you think, and rightfully so, Commissioner Kropa, about where the dollars are going to come from. I think that's really important, that the county seriously considers how much they're going to invest in this public infrastructure project, where those funds are going to come from, because that's really critical to other funders in the project as well. We invested in this project 3 or 4 times, I believe, through CRA for various phases of the project. We never believed it was our responsibility as a public foundation, but not a publicly, we're organized as a public foundation, that we had the responsibility for basic infrastructure. But we wanted to add to enhancements of the project as it moved forward, because we believed that it was based on a very public process, that it was not a process that was engineered by a few special interest groups, that the people had spoken and very clearly wanted to see riverbank restoration, wanted to see the river flow and the dams removed. A series of meetings on that. We also were really encouraged by the amount of collaboration and cooperation between the city and the county at that time, between other units of government, with the road commission. We were very encouraged by the number of different funding sources that had been brought to the table. So we added our few small, if you will, private dollars to the pot, but we encouraged others. We brought up the Fry Foundation. We talked about, wrote letters of support for the Great Lakes Fisheries Trust. Other folks besides local dollars, federal and state agencies, other private foundations, look to us as the on-the-ground, if you will, local funder to say, is this project credible? And we said it was credible because the County Board of Commissioners and the City Board of Commissioners at that time had voted in support of this. And I know that most of you were not around that table then, but a commitment is a commitment is a commitment. And so I'm really encouraged to hear that that's not what's wavering now, it's just an issue of dollars. And I want to reiterate to you really the importance of having a strong county commitment to move forward in terms of dollars for this project, because it's only going to help you leverage more. I also want to give a shout out to CRA, who's done an incredible job at an incredible bargain price of raising and leveraging money. I think they've done a fabulous job. They brought just tremendous resources to this project, and I want to encourage you to continue supporting that, because that's the kind of funding that they need to move forward. I mean, they've leveraged how many millions of dollars for $20,000 a year for X amount of years for this project. You're never going to find a staff person at that price that can manage the project and raise those kind of funds. So I want to encourage you to continue underwriting CRAs, continue to make a commitment moving forward in terms of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Seeing no one, we are adjourned. Oh, yes.
Uh-oh.
Shouldn't we set the meeting with the road commission while we're all sitting in the same?
Might as well. Thank you, Commissioner Kropa. I was
I'm not
going
a
to do
big
that,
fan of the
but
doodle
yes,
poll.
where, see?
Not a fan.
All right, well, let's bring up the calendar.
Have my hand out.
Look at how excited Carl is. Carl's like, when is Bill back from vacation?
Commissioner Nelson? John, go.
Next week sometime.
We're setting a meeting here. so
Not
go
for
ahead.
the meeting, I'd just
Carl.
like to make a comment if I could.
Well, I was just talking to Jim, and we're not ready to set a date. I think our board needs to meet.
All right, that's
Well, we
fine.
can still set a date for later,
After
like after your
After your
meetings?
board meets?
but we've got a lot, I mean, we're talking about August 24th to April, or, I'm sorry,
April, we gotta
April
come in.
24th to August 21st, so just sometime in there, we need to meet.
Right, I would say that we could probably get back to you within less than a week to schedule a date. Is that fair?
Can we
That's-
ask
We've got
that it
two.
be?
We've got
as-
two issues that we need to address.
All right.
Can it be as close to April 24th as possible, maybe on that end of the spectrum, rather than the August end of the, because, well, the.
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
contract
I would say,
expires
yeah,
in August.
it'd be ideal if it was, yeah.
All
Okay,
right.
that's all.
We're-
That's why I
yeah.
wanted, because we're already
Okay,
in
so
March.
you guys will
so-
meet and you will get back to us within the next week or so, and give us a date?
We've got a meeting next Thursday.
Okay,
Right.
So
sounds fine.
I think we probably can all sit down Thursday and pick a date
Okay.
after
All
that, because
right.
Bill will be back then, too.
Okay,
So
good.
all 5 members will be back.
Because
All
we've
right.
got two issues. It's not just coming up for the funding in that spectrum, it's the contract that expires in August. So both are going to need to be discussed.
John, you wanted to,
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in my public life, I very much try not to ascribe motives to other people because only they know what their motives are. So I hope you'll take my comments this evening as sincere comments and try to not think about other motives that I may have that have been stated here publicly.
I'm going to ask the same here.
all right, we are definitely adjourned and we look forward to hearing from you.
Okay,
Christine.
Probably may not work.
I know you're not. I know you're not.
Carol. Yes. Do I make it out?